Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that brief interlude, that video there. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Claire Bishop, for those of you who I do not yet know. As Executive Director at American Public Square, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's member social and event. So it's just a delight to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces here tonight. We've got a beautiful venue at Rieger in the upstairs room. It's just gorgeous tonight, so really pleased to have you. I want to start by just saying thank you so much to American Public Square members. Tonight is really all about you. We super appreciate the continuity of your support during the last several years especially that have been particularly crazy. Many of you are longtime members. It's really exciting to be able to stand here at the end of another remarkable year, a difficult year, and I want to give a shout out to all of you who, as members of American Public Square and stand-up people in your own communities, have helped to, really engage, prioritize engaging, even when it's not easy, especially when it's not easy. Having conversations and bringing civility back to the public square is what we here at APS are all about, and we know that our members know that firsthand. So from the bottom of our hearts, full APS team, I want to say thank you very much to our APS members tonight. Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're not a member at APS and you happen to come with a member tonight, know that these kind of events will be on tap next year. We'll be doing a lot more in-person gathering, and that's one of your benefits from being an APS member. So please consider joining if you are not already a member. I want to thank Jason Kander, who will receive a proper introduction momentarily from my colleague Alana, for joining us for this conversation tonight. I know that's why many of you have shown up tonight to hear what I think will be a riveting conversation about his book. Thank you, Jason. Thanks again to the Rieger for making their lovely establishment available to us. I want to thank APS board members. I know a couple of them are here in attendance tonight. Your support and dedication to our work helps making our mission of bringing civility back to the public square possible, so we thank you as well. I got a special job tonight, which is to introduce to you our American Public Square interns. We have a fabulous cohort of interns from William Jewell College, and I'm going to give them just a moment. They're going to come up here and introduce themselves briefly, just so you can kind of get a face with the name. Come on up, remember where we talked about, right in this area. And then if you give me this mic back when we're done, that'd be amazing.
Hello. I'm Alexander Walls. I'm an International Relations and Institutions and Policy major.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Schenk, and I'm a Political Science and International Relations major.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Turner. I'm also a Political Science major.
Hi, I'm Ian Woldridge. I'm also a Political Science major and a member of the prior fellows. So, yeah.
Awesome, guys. Yes, give them a round of applause. These young people have been so amazing this semester. They have been a steady presence at, I think, every event that we've done this fall, showing up in their T-shirts and their blazers, and we really appreciate y'all. So thanks for getting up here with the hot mic to introduce yourselves. One last thing before I hand this off to my colleague, Alana Muller, who will be moderating our conversation this evening, is a sincere and heartfelt thank you to the APS staff. We have, again, had a very busy year. We've been navigating a lot of challenges and ups and downs, and just like everybody, and without our team, none of this would be possible. So I just want you guys to show your hands if I say your name: Cindy Johnston, Trisha Maxfield, Alana Muller, who's here tonight. A special shout out to Lauren Weinhold, who's no longer on the APS team, but she's fond of saying she's a bad rash, she's hard to get rid of. So she's also here tonight, and a steady friend of APS. I hear a laugh. I know that's her. Thank you, Lauren. And it wouldn't be complete without a shout out to Ambassador Katz, who has been traveling from meetings abroad all day today. He threatened that he might show up. His plane was supposed to land around 6 p.m., so don't be surprised if he does walk in the door. But this is truly Alan's vision coming to life. It's such an honor and a privilege for myself and for our team to work on this mission every day. And I just want to, express my sincere and heartfelt appreciation to Alan for starting this organization to begin with, for investing his time and energy in generous and countless ways to the organization. So although he's not here this evening physically, not yet at least, he is certainly with us in spirit. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Alana Muller.
Thank you. Now is it on? Okay. Well, I want to add my welcome to APS members and guests. I am so excited to see all of you. Thank you so much for making this a priority to be here tonight. It really is special for the team to see so many people coming out, and we're just delighted to have you, so thank you for that. I am particularly delighted to welcome our featured guest tonight, who I'm sure needs not much of an introduction, but I'll do a little bit of one anyway. Jason Kander is the president of National Expansion at Veterans Community Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting veteran suicide and homelessness. He's also the host of Majority 54, one of the nation's most popular political podcasts, and sits on a number of boards. Among Jason's 2 New York Times bestselling books, Invisible Storm, A Soldier's Memoir of Politics and PTSD, we are actually selling those books tonight through Bliss Books, so I hope that you'll stop by and check that out. I also want to welcome Jason's wife, Diana, my friend and former colleague, who's also here this evening. Wave. There she is. So join me in welcoming Jason Kander.
Thanks.
So, Jason, I shared with you when we talked last week that I was deeply moved by reading your book. And I admitted to both Jason and Diana tonight that I actually listened to the book, and it was a little bit eerie because I know them both, and to actually hear them share the story in audio was almost a surreal experience. They're so personal, and for those of you who have read the book or listened to it, you know what I'm talking about. It's a deeply moving experience, and I have never quite read anything like that, where somebody was so transparent and honest about what was going on inside their home in a way that I think is so important. And so first, I want to thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
And thank you for saying all those nice things.
Well, it's all true. It's all true. You know, many of us thought, and you talk about this in the book, so many of us thought that you might be the next president of the United States, or at least the mayor of Kansas City, right? And it seemed clear from reading the book that you saw yourself in those roles. So it wasn't such a stretch for us to imagine you there because you believed it so wholeheartedly yourself. That was, of course, before you recognized your own PTSD. Tell us what you're doing now and how you're feeling about it.
Sure. That's a great first question, so thank you. Thanks for doing this. Let me start by thanking all of you for coming and American Public Square. I remember when Alan first had the idea for American Public Square, and I remember talking to him about it because he, like probably almost every other human in this room, was getting called by me for political contributions. And I remember, talking with Alan and trying to pivot the conversation back to him giving me money, and it being very hard because he was very excited about this idea he had for an organization where people would have these civil discussions. And I remember being really irritated by how passionate he was about that because I was trying to get some contributions out of this guy. And no, I kid, but I am totally serious. And in all seriousness, it's really cool now to be here and that it's a very real thing. So I'm excited to be here. What I'm doing now, I appreciate you asking that question first because one of the things I learned is like when family members, for instance, read the book, I now give them the advice to read the last chapter first. So it's good to start there. What I do now, as you mentioned, I'm the president of National Expansion at Veterans Community Project. So I have the incredible opportunity to spend my days helping other veterans literally get home safely and also to deal with the suicide epidemic among veterans. I've been doing that job for 3.5 years. What I do is I work with my team and we build villages of tiny houses to transition homeless veterans into permanent housing, and also outreach centers to reach out to any veteran who's struggling. A lot of people are familiar with the statistic that on average every day 20 veterans in the United States take their life. What most people are maybe not familiar with is that on average out of that 16 at the time that that happens are not connected to any veteran-specific services of any kind. So what we do is we lower that barrier to entry really down to the ground, and we are able to save a lot of lives. In particular, you may have met Dylan as you came in. Dylan's a former Army officer who leads our veteran services here in Kansas City. We should just give Dylan a round of applause, frankly, because, yeah. He and everybody else in that role have much harder jobs than me. I get to run around and talk to people about building these in their cities, but like he does the real work, and so do the others on his team. So that's what I do. That's my day job. But mostly, the answer to your question is I'm having a lot of fun. Diana and I have. Yeah, you can applaud having fun. Thank you. Why just her? Like what? No, just kidding. We have 2 kids, 9 and 2. They're awesome. I still feel I'm engaged in politics. I don't have my name on a ballot, but I very much feel a part of things. And more importantly, I get to focus on anything that really grabs me and that I'm interested in and that I care about. And right now, that honestly, a lot of that is coaching my son's Little League team and playing baseball with a bunch of guys my age who refuse to play softball. And Diana will tell you I spend way too much time talking and thinking and practicing for that. And it's a lot of what I do, to be honest. So
I think that sounds pretty great.
yeah, I'm having a really good time. So and I came here to see all of you. That's my life story. You should still read the book, though.
And pick up a copy on the way out. Yeah. And by the way, Jason will sign those books. He'll stick around and sign those books. One thing I wanted to say is that, so most of you are members. You know the American Public Square format is to hand out Q&A cards and have you write them down. And we have a roving reporter who curates them and then asks of you. We're going to change things up tonight, only because Ambassador Katz is not here. Only because he'd have my head otherwise. So don't tell on me. But I'm going to have you ask some questions. So I think either Claire or Ian. Ian is running around with a microphone. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll be by with the mic. While you're thinking about your questions, I have another one. So, Jason, if you hadn't gone into politics, do you think that you would have recognized your PTSD sooner and dealt with it differently?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I think the chances are high that I would have somewhat sooner. Yeah, because there was a point at which I at least was able to admit to myself that what was going on with me was not normal and was not okay. I was not yet willing to identify it for myself as PTSD. That was mostly because I, like a lot of veterans, felt like, so let me step back from this answer for a second and do a sidebar here, which is that I think a lot of the perception that a lot of people have is that the reason so many veterans and others won't acknowledge that they have a problem like this or go get help, it oftentimes gets chalked up to the idea that we see it as weak or that there's something wrong with getting help. I never saw it that way, and at this point, there's very few veterans who do, because there's been a very steady drumbeat of the idea that there's nothing weak about getting help, that it's an act of strength, and most veterans acknowledge that and subscribe to that belief. What is unique to veterans, I think, is that from the moment you step into the military, I can only speak for the Army, but the whole Army I will now speak for, that from the moment you get off the bus at basic, the message that is like just gotten into you every day is the idea that what you're doing is no big deal, that everybody else has it much worse. And that sounds like I'm faulting it. I'm not. Like, for me to do what I did in Afghanistan, for other people to do their jobs, you have to believe that. If you don't believe that, you can't do your job. You have to believe that what you're doing is no big deal and other people have it worse, so just go do it. So it's a very useful belief. The problem is that when you separate from the service or when you come home, nobody disabuses you of that notion. Nobody flips that switch off and is like, actually, that was crazy. And if you don't have problems, then maybe there's something wrong with you. You know, nobody says that. So the reason it took me so long a large part of it was that I genuinely believed that there couldn't have been anything wrong with me that was connected to my service because what I did was no big deal compared to other people I knew as far as I was concerned. And because of that belief, it went to a next step, which was I genuinely believed that if I were to accept the idea that I had PTSD and claim that mantle, to me that was like stolen valor. And in the military, there's really no greater sin than, you know, stealing valor. Like, to me, it was no different than pinning a Purple Heart that I was not awarded onto my uniform. If I were to say that I sustained trauma that I didn't feel was justified. Now, there was a point at which I think I became more open to the idea that I did, whether I admitted it to myself or not, and that's a point where probably a year or 2 years out from me getting help, it probably ran headfirst into the reality in my mind that, well, it doesn't really matter because I want to be President of the United States and the President of the United States can't have PTSD. So it's not that I thought about it that much. It was just more like, I'm not really going to let myself go down this road and consider this any greater because that's not really an option for me. So yeah, I do think probably I would have very possibly dealt with it sooner.
Well, okay, so sticking on this thread though, because of your public profile, do you think that you had particular advantages? I'm thinking about, you know, you tell it in a somewhat humorous way in the book about how you walked into the VA the first time. And, you know, in a way, it's sort of a presidential candidate walks into the VA, right? Yeah. So here we are in a bar. So do you think that you were able to get the help you needed more fully or in a different way or capacity because of your public profile?
I was able to get the help I needed much faster than other people, but it had nothing to do with my public profile. Actually, I benefited not at all from my, you know, I was just another guy whose last 4 digits of his social they were looking at. I was able to go through the system a lot faster because I lived in Kansas City where Veterans Community Project was located. 6 weeks before I dropped out of public life, I toured Veterans Community Project and was blown away by it and felt like, I remember I went home to Diana and I said, I wish I could just quit everything I'm doing and go work there. But it wasn't, in my mind, like a realistic notion. I was a politician running for office, so I just the next day went back to calling all of you for money. But 6 weeks after that, I went to the VA, and one of the things they told me was they wanted to help me. I get my health care at the VA now. I'm not in the business of saying bad things about the VA. It's a great experience. But anybody, even who works at the VA, will tell you that it can be frustrating because of the way Congress has set it up to enter the system. It can be frustrating. And what they told me that day was that it would probably be a few months before I could get enrolled in the system and start getting help. So I called over to Veterans Community Project, and they were like, yeah, come on down here. So I went through the front doors of the Outreach Center, just like thousands of other Kansas City veterans, and they handled my paperwork for me, and a week later I had my first therapy appointment at the VA. So.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah. What made you walk into Veterans Community Project in the first place?
I didn't know what else to do, and that's probably why a lot of people come to see us. And Diana's pointing at herself. You were the reason? Diana was the reason. I'm sure that's right. I'm sure Diana was like, you should just call Brian, who's co-founder and CEO and our friend. Yeah, I'm sure that's right, and that's the answer. But I guess the reason that I was like, okay, I will, is that I'd been there and I'd seen it, and there was just no question. Like, if somebody has the answer to what I'm supposed to do, it's them. I described the place, the vibe of our organization as like if a forward operating base in Afghanistan and a startup in Silicon Valley had a baby. Like it's like super innovative and inspirational, and yet also feels completely like home to people like me because it's, got that barracks feeling of like, people love you because they treat you just kind of bad, the way veterans are with each other. So, yeah,
it's comfortable.
It was, yeah, very much so. And then I just started hanging out there. So
that's a great story.
Finally, they were like, "You should just work here."
Yeah, exactly.
You're not doing anything.
I wonder if any of you have any questions. If you do, raise your hand. Ian will bring you a Am I seeing any questions? Over here. Katie has a question.
Hi,
If you'll wait until you get a microphone, that would be helpful.
I love the book. You know I read
Thank
it
you.
early. But how did you all decide, because I know you both, and I knocked on doors from the get-go. What made the decision, because that was the most poignant
It's okay. You
part
can say
of
it's the
book.
best part of the book is my wife. I totally
No, it
agree.
is
Go
not-
ahead,
No,
Katie.
it is not your wife, because I work in healthcare, and I've been in healthcare
Yeah.
for 50 years.
Yeah.
But the fact that you went from what your vision was versus what Diana was going through,
Yeah.
and that was
Right, that's what I mean.
How did you make up that? What was your decision?
So, yeah, sure. So the question is about the choice we made to the way the book is structured. So the book is structured in many ways like a conventional memoir, with the exception, with two exceptions. One, it's a memoir about having a secret psychological disorder while you run for president, which is probably unconventional. And two, that I'm not the only voice in the book. Pretty much every chapter, there's a passage of a couple of pages in the first person from Diana. Thank you. And we did that for a couple of reasons, in no particular order. One, I'm not the only best-selling author in my house, so if you have another really good author, they should be in your book. Another would be that we really wanted people to know not just about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth, but also about secondary post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth. That was really important to us because when I started getting help, I and she, the two of us, we didn't know anything about that. And it was my therapist at the VA who made me aware of it and therefore her aware of it, and then she ended up getting help as well. So we wanted other people to know that, and we wanted people to be able to benefit from the book, whether they'd experienced trauma or not, because the truth is, as we've learned over the last several years, everybody is connected to this in some way, whether it's in your family or someone close to you or you yourself. And then the last reason, that's more of a secondary thing, and it's more of just a literary device thing, is that one of the things that I think makes the book really effective is that the book, the story is told from my vantage point in chronological order of the experience of going through this and being in denial about it, not even knowing that I have PTSD. But in order to make that work and have people be able to connect with it, whether they had experienced trauma or not, or were in the same, I wrote the book for me 14 years ago. I wanted people who were in the place that I was in when I first got home, or had sustained any trauma but didn't acknowledge that it was affecting them, to be able to pick up the book and see themselves without being beat over the head with it. And that meant I couldn't have the whole first 3/4 of the book me just using the vocabulary I learned in therapy. Because if you're reading the book and you don't recognize that you have PTSD, and I say to you, well, I had hypervigilance, you're like, okay. If I say to you, I felt like I was in danger all the time, and that anybody who didn't see all the danger in the world was crazy, and I was the only person who saw it, you're going to be like, okay, maybe I get that, right? But in order to do that, that meant that I had to return to my prior mindset and sort of narrate the book from that point of view. And at some point, if you're the reader, you're like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? How does he not see that that's not normal? Checking your house at night with a gun every night. So it's very helpful to have a second narrator occasionally come in and tell you what they were seeing and what they were observing in their husband. So those are all the reasons why we did it. It's my favorite part of the book. I think it's why the book has been so successful. By the book. So.
And not so subliminal.
All of our
message, right?
royalties, of which, by the way, go to Veterans Community Project. So.
Jason, you mentioned early in the book that you noted the reaction that people had when you told them you enlisted, sure. and that some of them had surprise and others had regret that you had enlisted, and they said things to you like they thought that you had many more other more attractive offers because you were a white, privileged, well-educated young man, right? is this a divide that we should be addressing, and are there consequences to sort of the civilian perception of anyone who enlists?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, one of the things that I felt like I really needed to do this is a book talk, so I'm gonna keep talking about the book and in using this part. So as we put this book together, we wanted it to be something that could be useful to anyone, and we weren't looking to write a book that's the kind of book that is like on, the shelf, exclusively on the shelf of like a 50 or 60-year-old man who also reads a lot of Tom Clancy, and you know what I mean? So like, nothing against those books. There's a chapter in this book that's perfect for that person, right? But I also wanted it to be a book that, and I'm not trying to stereotype, I'm just talking about who reads these books. I wanted women to read this book too. I wanted moms to read this book. I wanted people who had no interest, men who had no interest in the military to read this book. And I wanted people who didn't care about politics to read this book, which is a tall task, right? So what we needed to do, though, at the same time, is I couldn't take for granted the idea that everybody would just understand why I wanted to be in the military after 9/11, who would read the book, and therefore connect with me and my story. So the first chapter is talking about the decision to join and walking through what that was like after 9/11 as a kid who was going to a good East Coast college and was headed to a good East Coast law school. And that's what I was getting a lot from people were like, why would you do that? And what they wouldn't say was what was implicit in that, which is, but you don't have to, right? And I talked a lot about in the book in that chapter about how irritated I was by that. And jumping forward to now, I do think it's really harmful. I think it's been really harmful over the last 20 years, the civil-military divide that exists in our culture. One of the things that makes Veterans Community Project so special is we really bridge that divide, and that's really a big part of what we do is we bring the community to the veterans and the veterans to the community, and literally the way our village is set up is to like recreate that transition and start it over, because it's a very difficult one. The way I think it affects our society now, to me, goes even beyond the military. To me, it goes to the fact that so few people now serve. This is the longest consecutive period in American history without some form of mandatory service. I'm not in favor of mandatory military service, mostly because I think that the military is better as a volunteer military, but and this is controversial, I'm very in favor of universal required service. And not as controversial in this room, which is great.
Well,
great
what does that look like? What does universal required service look like?
I think coming out of high school or college, I think everybody should spend a year working with Americans who grew up differently than them. And I would imagine this is a rather warm audience for this concept.
I was going to say, this is his plug for American Public Square, if you haven't heard of it.
I think one of the things that worries me most about the country's future goes deeper than the problems we have in terms of the fragility of our democracy and things like that, because I think this is at the root of it, is that it's very hard to answer the question these days what it means to be American. And I'm not talking about identity politics, I'm not talking about any of that, I'm talking about the fact that it used to be the case that when you went to work in the morning, there was a 1 in 3 chance that you and your coworkers watched the same thing on television last night. There was a 100% chance that you, even if you didn't watch the same broadcast, that you got the same information in your news the night before. We can't do anything about that. But it used to also be the case, because of the nature of service and the mandatory nature of service, that at least most families had somebody in the family who had served with people who came from a different neighborhood, a different town, a different background, who looked differently than them, who had I'm a Jewish kid who came from money in the suburbs of Kansas City, and the military is the reason that I don't feel like a stranger in any room, because I spent months and months at a time with people who grew up completely different than me and were absolutely my family for those months. And I just think it would be a really good thing if we all had to get to know each other again. I think it would make it a lot harder for us to not see humanity in one another when we discuss the issues.
It's a nice answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks for asking.
That's great. I think I'm getting the high sign that there's somebody out there with a microphone who has a question.
So I have two questions. The first is, I'm wondering how you felt last August when Afghanistan fell and how that made you feel after having been over there and spent all the time and the resources. That would be interesting. And then as someone who watched your campaign in Missouri, and I'm sure I gave you some money, I'm just wondering, I'm wondering if you have any political aspirations for the future. So two questions.
This is a pretty good double feature question. I actually like these two together. I appreciate it. Okay. August was really hard for me, 2021, and for a lot of veterans, particularly Afghanistan veterans. Actually, where did Diana go? Is she? Okay, she'll be right back, I'm sure. I have a really hard time giving a short answer about this, and she's really good about going like, that's too long, just say this. So I was gonna just bring her up. It's not that I felt like we were doing something wrong, but if you were to write the American story from the beginning, you would not write Afghanistan as the longest war in American history. It should not have been. I am not of the opinion that it should have been. So when I talk about this, sometimes people take it as like I'm taking a shot at the I'm not. It was really hard emotionally to watch. You can intellectually understand that things have to come to an end and still have a really hard time seeing it. The other thing that happened at that time is that I and a lot of other Afghanistan veterans across the country had a lot of people still there. And we were working very hard to get them out. I'm going to see if I can do this in 60 seconds. I and a buddy of mine were working really hard to get 4 guys that we served with out, and it's been 20 years, so they had families, so it was really 40 people. We did not successfully get them into the airport. We had them really close. The bomb went off. It was a really bad scene. We decided not to stop. At the time, not a very good decision, it didn't seem like, but we didn't know what else to do. American forces left. We stuck with it. I'm trying to give the shortest version of this I can.
You don't have to. This doesn't have to be short. So just tell the story.
It gets real long.
Tell the story.
3 weeks later, we ended up chartering an airliner into Mazar-e Sharif in northern Afghanistan. I get kind of emotional about this. Sorry, hang on. Okay. And by that time, we had 400 people that were counting on us. And we raised a bunch of money, and we got the plane in there. And then we got them all out. We had a fake wedding in Mazar-e Sharif for 4 days. And then the Taliban crashed it and didn't know that this was the 400 people they were looking for. And they danced a couple songs and ate some of the food and left. And then we got 400 people on an airplane to Albania. Yeah, sure. Now that Diana's back, I'd like you to know that I've only been talking about this for 60 seconds, which should impress you. We then realized we kind of had figured something out that we could do. We started this organization called Afghan Rescue Project, and now it's been, what month are we in? December? Now it's been about 14 months, and we've gotten about 2,000 people out of the country, and we're very close. And I did a lot of this, by the way, this initial stuff with the help of Jewish Vocational Services here in Kansas City. I don't know how we did any of this crap, but we did it. And in the next 3 to 4 months, the entire wedding party, about 300 people, are moving to St. Louis, Missouri. That's real. So how I felt about it was I was really upset by it. It's been a very difficult year with the State Department not always doing rarely doing what I thought they should do. But we've come to a point where I think we're working really well together, and I'm proud of that. So that's what I think about that. It's not an answer made for politics. That's just my experience. It's a good double feature with your second question about running for something, because I have been out of the business of seeking political office now for a little over 4 years, and I have definitely done more good in the world in that 4 years than I ever did in the years that preceded it. Which is to say, maybe I'll run again one day. I'm in no hurry to do that. And I know politicians say all the time that's not something I'm thinking about right now, and they're full of it. I know that because I said that a lot to the question of, are you going to run for president? And I was going to run for president, and I was like, it's not something I'm thinking about right now. I was thinking about it like all the time. It's all I was thinking about. But I actually mean it now, because when I want to affect something, I can affect it, and I don't have to sit in committee hearings, and I can play baseball, and I can coach my kids' team, and I can work out at 10 a.m. if I want to. And there's two big differences between me now and me then. One is I don't spend my time thinking about what I could do in the future out of a desire to not be in the intolerable present, because the present is pretty good and I'm enjoying it. And then the other thing about it is that I guess the difference now is I feel like I've earned the right to not do that, and I didn't used to think that way. And today, not to make a pun out of the name of this organization, but today I feel like America and I are square, and I didn't used to feel that way. So thank you for the question.
Is there another audience question before I go on? Okay.
Hey, Jason, thank you for doing this. The question that I have, now that you've stepped back from things, how have your views about politics changed, if any?
You know, it's funny. Thank you, Mark. You and I talked the other day, and I was like, you were like, do you want to know the questions? Or not that she was going to tell me the questions. I'm not trying to create a Donna Brazile CNN type controversy here. But she was like, do you want to talk over what we'll talk about? And I was like, look, I've done like 100 of these interviews. There's nothing you or anybody else can ask that I haven't been asked. I think almost every one of these questions is kind of unique, so nice job. Yeah, it has changed it a little bit, the way I think about politics, because what I've noticed is about myself is that, you know, I'm still a partisan. You know, like I still know what team I'm on, and I still have I'm as liberal as I was and everything. But the only time I talk about things publicly when I want to now, right? Which, you know, anybody who follows me on Twitter knows that's still pretty often. But I still choose what I talk about. And the fact that I don't live knowing like, okay, someone's going to, every headline I read that I'm not like, okay, someone's going to ask me about this. What do I think? And I noticed that even though I didn't admit to myself that I was doing it before, that I don't therefore have to filter it through like okay, if I answer this way, how does that affect this, and this, and these other people in my party, or these people in Kansas City, or in Missouri, or whatever. And it's interesting, like the conversations Diana and I have now at home about politics, I think are different, because it has freed me from what was a bit of a ideological, I'm not going to say prison, but a constraint that I probably didn't admit existed. So it's not like all of a sudden I have all these like conservative views. I don't. But I do think it has given me free rein to, I don't like have an example for you, but, well, actually I do, which is Afghanistan. Had I been an active, had I been in the Senate, had I been whatever, mayor, one, there'd be 2,000 people still in Afghanistan who shouldn't be there. And two, I would have processed it through what I had been most recently at that point, which was a surrogate for the Biden campaign. And I would have thought about it as how I would defend, I think I would have very possibly thought about it as how I would have defended the administration. And instead, what I ended up doing was using my relationship with the administration to achieve my goals. And that's probably a pretty good example of how I think about it differently. So thanks.
Well, so let me key off of your answer. We do have some members here in the room tonight who have been involved in politics, but most of us have not directly run for office. And most of us at least feel that we have some freedom to be able to answer without a filter, the way you're describing that you feel now, where you have less of a filter than you had before. If you got back into politics, do you think you'd have to do the dance again?
maybe. It's one of the reasons not to do that, to be honest. Like, I still have a lot of friends, close friends, who are in politics, some of them at very high levels. And if I had to pick an emotion that I feel toward them in those conversations that is greatest, it's probably pity. But I don't mean like they're pathetic. I mean, like, you know, when I talk to good friends who are like really in it, like people who you all see on TV and talk about or whatever, you know, and I talk to them and we're, as human beings, it often for me, I'm like, oh man, that is hard and it is rough. So it is a reason, like I know what it's like outside the castle now, so it is hard to think about that. So yeah, like I'd love to sit here and tell you, like, you know, if I run for office again, no, I'm not pulling any punch. No, of course I'm gonna have goals, you know, I'm gonna have, like, if I run for office, like, I'm gonna be wanting to get elected. I don't think I said things before that I didn't believe, and I wouldn't say things I don't believe in the future. But like, yeah, of course, if you're running, it's a different set of responsibilities than if you have a podcast, you know? And like, on my podcast, I say things regularly that I then follow up by saying, there's some more evidence for you that I'm probably not running. Like, I feel bad all the time for the kid at the Republican National Committee whose job it is probably to transcribe everything I say on that show in case I run again, because he probably doesn't share my views, and that's probably really annoying to him. But sometimes I talk directly to him. I'm just like, look, take these to your bosses and show them that you don't have to do this anymore. Clearly this guy is not trying to run right now. So yeah, that's the reality of it. You know, you got to pull some punches when you're running, but that's not all bad, right? Like, sometimes, you know, you got to be diplomatic to get things done. That's all right.
Well, and I mean, in every industry, there's a cadence.
Right. You all got politics in your office. There's stuff that you would like to say about that guy that you don't say, because, you know, it wouldn't help anybody.
Claire, I never feel that way. I know we have a question up here. Do we have a microphone? We already have a questioner. We'll come back, I promise. Go ahead.
Hi, Jason. My name's Lee Norman.
Hi, Lee.
We've met in the past. I just retired on the 30th of September as an Army colonel. Yeah. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm older than you are, somehow. But anyway, my question...
You outrank me too, so it's fine.
A question, really, you mentioned Twitter earlier. Oh, by the way, I came back from deployment in 2018, jumped onto Governor Kelly's cabinet, ran the COVID response for the state of Kansas for 2 years. It was going from one PTSD source to another, quite honestly. Yeah. But my question is, you mentioned Twitter earlier. Twitter, social media in general, is that your friend or your enemy? Do you spend any time there these days? I'm sure it all wasn't a big love-in on social media. How'd you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, social media is a tool. It's a platform. And there's lots of downsides to it. I think about Twitter and Instagram and everything the same way I think about, there's no better word to use than this, just the way I think about fame. You can say no to, you know, if I run for office, I'd be working on humility more. I'd say notoriety. I don't care. Like, fame, okay, it's a platform. It's what it all is. So for me, the way I think about it in my own life is it's all currency, right? I want, when I go into a new community, to try and convince them to, you know, rezone a property so that we can build a village for Veterans Community Project. It's very helpful to me if the mayor in that town sees benefit to working with me. And like, one of the reasons that I can sometimes get that to happen is because I have a large following on social media and because I have notoriety, fame, whatever. That's how I think about it personally. Do I think it's necessarily a source for good in the world? I don't know. I think it's probably less of a source for good in the world this week than a few weeks ago, if I'm being honest. But all I can tell you is that's how I use it. I think there are a lot of damaging things about social media, but I worked with, for instance, going back to the Afghanistan theme here, I worked with Jewish Vocational Services and used social media at the very beginning of this to raise a couple $100,000, mostly from people in Kansas City, which is what got Afghan Rescue Project off the ground. It went on to, we've raised millions of dollars for it, but it wouldn't have worked if I hadn't been able to put out a tweet with a picture with everybody's faces redacted of the family that I was trying to get out. So for me, it's been very valuable. Do I think it's necessarily good for our brains? Probably not, but that's more your area, I think. So.
I know we have another audience question, please.
So this is political, you know me.
Yeah, hi. Nice to see you, sir.
First of all, I highly recommend the audiobook so we can hear Diana and your voices. That
Agreed.
adds a lot. It was a huge loss for us in Missouri, nationally and internationally, but we're delighted that you and Claire are now liberated and you can be your own people. So what about Missouri? What can we be hopeful about in Missouri and what can we do?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Look, let's start by talking about a few other states that should be the goals, okay? A few years ago, 10 years ago, Colorado was not a state that you would think of as we'll probably be fine there, right? North Carolina was not a state you would think of where you'd go, we should have a shot there. Georgia was not a state that you would go, you know what they're going to do? They're going to have 2 U.S. senators, one of whom is a liberal Jewish documentarian, and the other who is a black preacher. Would not have done that. The reason that has changed is because they had a dedicated donor table, a dedicated progressive infrastructure. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That put in the time, and that most importantly didn't think election cycle to election cycle, but thought in decades, right? One of you mentioned, you referenced myself and Claire in the question, and it's a good example, is that one of the things that happens every election cycle here is that people come to me and to Claire and a couple other people, and they're like, not everyone, but some people are like, you have to do you have to do this and all that. And putting aside what that means for me or for Claire or for anybody else, the problem with that is that if, like any other organization, if you are investing everything in a single individual or a single effort, it's probably not going to be successful. And what they did in those states is they put together the progressive infrastructure with the funding ongoing, where they weren't working every election cycle to start everything over, to have to find exactly the right candidate and all that, to make it where people across those states were hearing the same messages, whether it was election time or not, and that was making a difference. How many of you have seen an ad about how great it is to work at Walmart or Amazon or Koch Industries on TV? Like, raise your hand if you've seen one of those ads. It's their employees talking. Okay, you need to understand, those are conservative political ads. Those are ads for the idea that American workers are treated fine and nothing should change about the way we have a balance of power between workers and management at the corporate level in this country, and that corporate influence is at a fine level. I'm not trying to go all whatever on you here. I'm just saying what you don't see are ads from the United Auto Workers, and it's not their fault, they don't have the funding for it, talking about the benefits of union membership, or why, whether you're in a union or not, you have a right to certain things at work. My point is that there is a steady drumbeat of conservative ideas all across our state from sources that we don't think of as political. And in those other states I mentioned, the reason that they have shifted, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is because that drumbeat was evened out. And so this is a nonpartisan room, but I'm providing information. And if this is something that is interesting to you, there's organizations like Mo Wins in Missouri, run by a woman named Laura Granich, that is interested in this long-term fight. And so, in answer to your question about the hope in Missouri, look, yes, there's always hope. Things can happen, absolutely. election cycle to election cycle, certainly. But what I would tell you is that the best hope, the best chance, is for everybody to be really, really realistic and say, this is a 10 to 15 year project, and we're going to dig in, and we're not going to get impatient, and we're going to put in the work. And if that happens, you can have a lot of success.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have just a couple more questions, and then we'll let you all get on about the business of purchasing your books so Jason can sign them. Diana, I'm going to drag you up here if you don't mind. And I told her I was going to do this. So everyone, Diana Kander. Hello. So this is a question. This is a question for you both. You know, most of us here in the room are not veterans. Mostly civilians. Civilians are in our lives. Although I think that we've all been impacted and touched by the work of veterans, certainly. What advice do you have to share with us about what we can do to be more supportive of veterans as civilians and as they're re-entering civilian life?
Oh, no, please. Let me think about it.
Okay. So I think a couple of things. One, it is really important to recognize, to think of veterans not in a charity category in your mind. We've been at war. We've recently come to the end of a conflict that lasted 20 years. And it's also a war where the nature of warfare was such that responsibility was pushed down to the lowest level in the chain of command that it really ever has been, right? For the most part, these conflicts were not decided by generals who were standing around sand tables deciding about divisions to move here and there. A lot of the major events in these conflicts they turned on corporals and sergeants and lieutenants making split-second decisions on street corners, and really pushed that sort of responsibility and consequence down to the lowest level. What that means is that when it comes to employing veterans, for instance, or enlisting them in community building efforts, it's important to remember that these are people who, if they spent 4 years in the military during this period, they managed at least 8 people and huge situations and millions of dollars in equipment. And personally, like, I'm going to hire that for a middle manager before a brand new Harvard MBA, like, every time. I don't care what their education is. And it's about recognizing that they have a lot more to offer. Like, we have a tendency to be like, oh, you came in the military, we should get you a job in law enforcement or as a security guard. And the truth is, it's like, we should get you a job where you have to solve problems and don't have as many resources as you should, which is most jobs. That's one thing. Another thing is, and this is probably the biggest thing to me, is that when you look at the way a lot of other cultures have handled people coming back from war, it's a lot different than the way we handle it. I read about this a little toward the end of the book, and I would recommend another book after you finish our book, which is called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And in Tribe, he talks a lot about the way, for instance, Native American cultures have welcomed warriors back, which is they would bring people in for a purification ceremony or a return ritual, and they would have people tell their stories without censoring them, and the entire tribe would listen. And the reason that that's done is so that people don't feel alone in the tribe, right? Because what happens is, in a time when less than 1% of the population serves, you come home and it doesn't take long for you to figure out which stories are okay and which stories are not, which stories to sanitize, which stories that when you tell them, people recoil. And so we have this big civil-military divide, and we need to work a lot harder to bring our civilian population closer to our military population. It's nice that everybody says thank you for your service, and like we're on the back of every NFL helmet and all their end zones and all the fun. It's fine, but we also have to stop acting like people are supposed to be the same person they were before the war because we gave them a free chicken feed, a roll up at Applebee's on Veterans Day. Like, it has to go deeper than that, and if it does, I think it'll be really healing for our veterans and for our society.
Thank you.
And car washes. We never cashed in one of those car washes, but they give them out in the month of November. I'll answer this question as a spouse or a friend or a daughter of a veteran, and I feel like I've tried every different way of like checking in, but just like checking in more creative ways. Not like, I don't think it works well when you're like, I think you have PTSD. I don't think that works really well, but trying to ask the kinds of questions that will open somebody up into a deeper, more authentic kind of conversation always yields to something better. So I would say if your questions aren't getting to where you want to go, then try different ones. So one of the ones that works for us is, how are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10? And then that allows you to prod further, whatever number they give you. And another one that we've done is, like, no matter what's going on, saying, what is something that you wish I knew about you, like in the last week or month or whatever. And just like whatever questions you can come up with that are sneaky ways to get to what's going on, rather than being accusatory, because I've tried that too. It doesn't work as well, or aggressive about it.
Yeah.
Great.
Can I put a button on that?
Absolutely.
No, applaud for sure. No, please. No. I'm just kidding. The button I'd put on it too is, I think one of the reasons that a lot of those conversations don't happen is because people say, well, what I hear all the time from people is, my father served in this place, or my grandfather served in this place. He didn't really talk about it. And one of the things I get into in the book is, no, he didn't talk about it with you. Because people say, well, he didn't like talking about it. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, there's some stuff that is hard for us to talk about. But when I'm with my other combat veteran buddies, we talk about stuff. And it might be conversations that you might find shocking, but we talk about it. And I'd say this to tell you that, like, it's not that, it's that you can tell when that conversation is one that you can have and when you can't. And so to Diana's point, just being a person who continually earns someone's trust, no matter what it is, no matter what kind of trauma you're talking about or what kind of experience you're talking, it doesn't have to be military. If you show genuine, sincere interest and curiosity about something, you'll generally earn the credibility of somebody talking to you about that thing. So.
That's nice. Thank you. Thanks, Diana. Thank you. Jason, yeah. Jason, it's a tradition at American Public Square to end our conversations with 2 questions. And I used to say with tweet-sized answers. I think I need to change that. But the questions are, so what and now what? So we've had a conversation about your book. We've had some other sort of smatterings of conversations about politics and your views on that. So what and now what? What do you want to leave us with tonight?
I wrote this book because I wanted people to know that post-traumatic growth was a real thing and was achievable. And because, and as far as the now what, we already talked about what I'm doing with my time, but in terms of events like this, and when I do go and I give interviews about the subject, whether it be the book or just post-traumatic stress, one of the big motivations for me is that there are so few portrayals of post-traumatic stress out there that are of post-traumatic growth. If you think about it, when you think about portrayals, whether they be fiction or nonfiction, they could be in the news, could be on the screen, of PTSD, it is generally what I refer to as PTSD porn, which is just, it's voyeurism. It's somebody robbing a bank after, abusing a substance, after beating their spouse. It's usually a combat veteran. Some of these depictions are harrowing and very accurate of a person who might be in the, worst part of post-traumatic stress. But what you don't ever see depicted, and what I never saw depicted, and therefore did not actually know was a thing, and I think it had a lot to do with why I didn't go get help, was I never saw any examples of people just going to treatment and getting better. So I didn't think that was a thing. And it's an additional reason why so few people go get help, because if the media sources you look at constantly tell you that PTSD is a terminal diagnosis, either because you're going to literally kill yourself or because it'll kill your career at a minimum, like, who the hell's going to line up to get diagnosed with that? So I was months into therapy before I found out, because I was getting better and I felt bad about it. And I asked my therapist, I was like, why am I getting better when so few people ever get better? And he was like, what are you talking about? And he had to show me all these VA studies that showed that people who commit to the program, the vast majority get to a point where the symptoms don't disrupt their life, that you get to post-traumatic growth. I literally had no idea. And I don't think most people know that. So what now, for me, a lot of it is just being, trying to model the idea that you can get better. So that's what I do a lot of, and that's why I give a lot of talks like this.
That's fabulous. Everybody, Jason Kander.
Thank you very much.
So, Jason, you may know that one of the civility tools that we have here at American Public Square is what we call the civility bell. And it may look to you like a concierge bell from your favorite hotel, but it is not. It is an engraved American Public Square civility bell. And if things get heated, Diana, you can use this too. If True decides that you and Jason have just said too much, he can ring the bell, right? If Bella feels the same way, she can ring the bell.
What if I just have like a severe cold? And
Ring the bell.
And I need help.
Ring the bell. Say chicken soup now.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have for you an American Public Square civility
Awesome.
bell.
Thank you.
And a membership to American Public Square.
Oh, thank you.
And we hope that you'll join us for more programming.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Alana.
So speaking of membership, thank you all for being members. For those of you who are not, I hope you will consider becoming a member. Conveniently, we have these lovely little membership sign-up cards, or for the technology inclined, we conveniently, again, have a wonderful QR code where you can sign up today by pointing your phone at this and signing up. So there's one of these up at the registration table. I hope you'll consider joining us. As I mentioned, our friends from Bliss Books and Wines are up front offering copies of Jason's books, which he has offered to sign for you if you're interested. And be sure to stop by the Veterans Community Project booth as well. And I want to thank you all for coming out tonight.
Can I make one quick announcement?
Please
because
do.
I've done a few of these. Because I know my next job is to go sign books, right?
Yes.
Please don't think me rude. If I'm going to stop right now, I'm going to walk right over there, because what will happen otherwise is we'll all have a conversation here, and I won't. So even if you don't buy a book and you just want to talk, it's okay if you want to get in line and talk to me over there, but I'm going to go over there right now. So, okay, and thank you all again.